I want you to look at your hands for a moment. Really look at them. Now imagine them cracked, bleeding raw from hot water and industrial soap. Imagine the skin peeling off your knuckles because you spent 15 hours scrubbing grease off plates in a restaurant kitchen. Imagine doing that every single day for 9 years straight. That was my life. My name is Evan Ward, and from the age of 20 to 29, I worked as a dishwasher in a diner in Cleveland, Ohio. I stood over a steel sink in a room that smelled like old oil and bleach, and I scrubbed breakfast plates, lunch plates, dinner plates, pots caked with burnt cheese pans crusted with bacon fat. I scrubbed until my fingers bled, and then I wrapped them in tape and kept scrubbing. I did this because my father was dying. At least that is what he told me. Every single paycheck I earned, I cashed at the corner store 2 blocks from the diner. I kept just enough to pay rent on a room the size of a prison cell. I kept just enough to buy bread, peanut butter, and whatever leftovers my boss let me take home at the end of the night. Everything else, every single dollar I had left, I wired home to my father in Tennessee. He needed surgery. He needed medication. He needed a caretaker when he could not get out of bed. He needed me to save his life from 1,000 miles away because I could not afford to be there in person. I believed him. I believed every word that came out of his mouth, because he was my father, because he raised me alone after my mother died, because he told me over and over again that family never abandons family, that wards stick together no matter what. So I stuck. I bled. I gave up my 20s, my health, my dreams, and my future for a man who sounded so weak on the phone that I used to cry myself to sleep, worrying I would wake up to news that he was gone. For 9 years, I did not take a vacation. I did not go to a movie. I did not buy new clothes unless the old ones had holes too big to ignore. I watched other people my age go to college, get married, travel the world, build careers. I watched them live, and I told myself it was okay. I told myself that sacrifice was love, that suffering for someone you care about is what good sons do. I was 28 years old when I finally saved enough money to visit home. It took me 9 years to scrape together $2 $800 that I did not send away. $2 $800. That is all I had to show for nearly a decade of my life. I bought a bus ticket to Tennessee. I imagined walking through the front door of my childhood home and seeing my father in a hospital bed, frail and grateful. I imagined him reaching out with trembling hands and telling me that I saved him, that everything I gave was worth it, that he loved me. Instead, I found him in a mansion. Not a house, a mansion. Stone columns, a circular driveway, a fountain in the front yard that probably cost more than I earned in 2 years. The grass was greener than anything I had ever seen in the poor coal town where I grew up. The mailbox had his name on it in gold letters. Gold. And there he was, my father. The man I had been killing myself to keep alive. He was in the backyard throwing a football. His skin was tanned. His arms were strong. He moved like a man who had never been sick a day in his life. He was laughing, chasing after a little boy who could not have been older than 4. A woman sat on the patio behind them, sipping wine and watching them with a smile on her face. A woman who was not my mother. A child who was not me. I stood at the edge of that driveway and I felt my entire world collapse. Every cracked knuckle, every skipped meal, every night I lay awake in that tiny room wondering if my father would survive until morning. All of it crashed down on me like a wave I could not outrun. I walked to the front door. I rang the bell. The woman answered. Later, I would learn her name was Amanda. She looked at me like I was a stranger, and I suppose to her I was. Then my father appeared behind her. Our eyes met, and I watched his face change. I watched recognition flash across his features, followed by something I had never seen in him before. Fear. He looked right at me, the son who had given him everything, and he said, "I am sorry. Do we know you?" I said, "Dad, it is me. It is Evan." His face turned to stone-cold hard, completely closed off. And the woman beside him looked between us and asked the question that broke whatever was left of my heart. "Martin, who is this man? You told me you do not have any children." My father did not blink. He did not hesitate. He looked at his wife, then looked back at me and said, "There must be some mistake. I have never seen this man before in my life." That was the moment something inside me died. But it was also the moment something else was born. Something harder, something colder, something that would not let him get away with what he had done. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not beg him to acknowledge me. Instead, I destroyed his perfect little life, and I am going to tell you exactly how I did it. To understand what my father stole from me, you need to understand where I came from. I grew up in Madison Ridge, Tennessee. If you have never heard of it, that is because there is nothing to hear. It is a small town in the eastern part of the state tucked into the hills where coal used to be king and poverty never left even after the mines closed. The kind of place where everyone knows your name, your business, and your family struggles going back 3 generations. The Ward family had plenty of struggles to know about. My mother died when I was 6 years old. Pneumonia. She got sick in November, and by Christmas she was gone. I do not have many memories of her. I remember the smell of her perfume. I remember her singing while she cooked dinner. I remember her tucking me in at night and telling me that I was her brave little man. And I remember standing at her grave in a suit that was too big for me, holding my father's hand while he cried so hard his whole body shook. After that, it was just me and him. My father, Martin Ward, worked as an auto body mechanic. When there was work, he was good at it, but work was not always there. The shop he worked for closed when I was 12. He bounced around after that, picking up jobs where he could find them. Some months we had enough to eat. Other months I learned to pretend I was not hungry, so he could have the last of whatever was in the pantry. We lived in a 2-bedroom house with a roof that leaked every time it rained, and a furnace that gave up every winter. I remember sleeping in my coat during cold snaps because we could not afford to fix the heat. I remember my father sitting at the kitchen table with a pile of bills, rubbing his temples like he could push the stress out through his skull. But despite all of it, he never let me feel unloved. That is the thing people do not understand. My father was not always a monster. Or maybe he was, and he was just good at hiding it. Either way, the man I grew up with told me every single day that I mattered. He came to my school plays. He taught me how to change a tire. He sat with me when I had nightmares about my mother and told me that she was watching over us from heaven. He used to say something that I carried with me for most of my life. He would put his hand on my shoulder, look me in the eyes, and say, "We are Wards. We do not abandon each other. Family is everything." I believed that. I built my entire identity around that belief. I thought loyalty was the highest virtue a man could have. I thought sacrifice was love. When I was 20, my father called me with news that shattered my world. His voice was weak on the phone, strained. He told me the doctors had found something wrong with his heart. A valve was not working right. He needed surgery. He needed medication. He needed ongoing care. And he needed money that he did not have. "I hate to ask you this, son," he said. "I have never asked anyone for anything in my life, but I do not have anyone else. Your grandmother is gone. I do not have siblings. It is just us. It has always been just us." I did not hesitate. I did not ask questions. I packed a duffel bag with everything I owned, which was not much, and I bought a one-way bus ticket to Cleveland. I had heard there were jobs there, restaurant work, labor work, anything that would pay. I walked into a diner called Benton's Diner on my first day in the city. The owner was a man named Harold Benton. He was 61 years old, built like a refrigerator, and had a face that looked like it had never smiled once in its entire life. He looked me up and down like I was a stray dog that had wandered in from the street. "You ever washed dishes before?" he asked. "No, sir." You willing to learn? Yes, sir. He handed me an apron and pointed to the back. Sink is in the corner. Do not break anything. Do not complain. Do not be late. You do those 3 things, you will be fine. That was the beginning of 9 years. I worked 6 days a week, sometimes 7, when Harold needed extra help. I started at minimum wage and stayed there for longer than I should have. I lived in a rented room in a building that smelled like mildew and cigarette smoke. I shared a bathroom with 4 other men. I ate whatever Harold let me take home at the end of the night. Cold fries, stale bread soup that had been sitting too long. Every 2 weeks, I cashed my paycheck and walked to the wire transfer office. I kept enough for rent. I kept enough for food. I sent the rest to my father every single time. I called him every Sunday. He always sounded tired, weak. He talked about doctor visits and medication costs and how scared he was that his heart would give out before the doctors could fix it, and he always ended the call the same way. I love you, son. I could not survive without you. I lived for those words. They made the cracked hands worth it. They made the exhaustion worth it. They made the loneliness worth it. I did not know yet that every single word was a lie. For 7 years, I never questioned anything. I trusted my father completely. When he said he needed money, I sent it. When he said the surgery was delayed, I believed him. When he said the medication costs were rising, I worked extra shifts to cover it. But in my 8th year in Cleveland, something changed. It started with small things, inconsistencies that I tried to ignore but could not shake from my mind. One week, my father mentioned a new cardiologist named Dr. Keller, who was supposedly the best in the region. I asked about him the following Sunday, and my father hesitated. "Which doctor?" he asked. "Dr. Keller, the cardiologist you mentioned last week." There was a pause. Then he said, "Oh, right. Yes, he is fine. Everything is fine." He could not remember the name of the doctor who was supposedly keeping him alive. I told myself he was confused. Sick people forget things. Medication causes memory problems. I made excuses for him because the alternative was too painful to consider. Then there was the money. I had been sending $900 a month for years. My father told me his medication alone cost $400. I asked him once how he covered the difference. "I manage," he said. "I find ways." "What ways?" "You are too sick to work. Evan, do not worry about it. Just keep doing what you are doing. I will figure out the rest." He changed the subject and never brought it up again. I started keeping a notebook. I wrote down everything he told me: dates of appointments, names of doctors, costs of procedures. I did not know why I was doing it at the time. Maybe some part of me already knew something was wrong. Maybe I was trying to convince myself that the story made sense. It did not make sense. The more I wrote down, the more holes I found. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday night. I had just finished a double shift and was walking back to my room when my phone rang. The number was from Tennessee, but I did not recognize it. I answered anyway. A woman's voice came through the line. Soft, hesitant, confused. "Hello, I am trying to reach someone about Martin Ward." My stomach dropped. I stopped walking in the middle of the sidewalk. "I am his son. Is he okay? Did something happen?" There was a long silence. I could hear her breathing. "His son," she said. "That is impossible. Martin told me he does not have any children." At that moment, I did not realize it, but the woman was connected to my father's new life. The world tilted. I felt like I had been punched in the chest. "Who is this?" I asked. "How do you know my father?" The line went dead. I stood on that sidewalk for 10 minutes staring at my phone. I called the number back. No answer. I called again. Nothing. I called my father immediately, but he did not pick up. I called again the next morning. No answer. I called that night. Still nothing. For 3 days, I heard nothing from him. I barely slept. I could not eat. I went through the motions at work, but my mind was spinning in circles. Who was that woman? Why did she think my father had no children? What was happening? When my father finally called back, he sounded annoyed. "What is going on?" I demanded. "I have been calling you for days. A woman called me. She said you told her you do not have a son." He laughed. It was a casual, dismissive laugh that made my skin crawl. "Evan, calm down. It was probably a wrong number, some confused woman dialing random people. You know how it is. She knew your name. She said Martin Ward specifically. There are other Martin Wards in the world. You are overthinking this. You always were a worrier." He changed the subject. He asked about work. He complained about his latest round of medication. He ended the call with the same words as always. "I love you, son. I could not survive without you." But this time the words felt hollow. I could not let it go. I started making calls of my own. I called the hospital in Madison Ridge where my father claimed to have his surgeries. I asked if they had records for a patient named Martin Ward. "I am sorry, sir. We have no record of anyone by that name." I called the pharmacy where he said he picked up his prescriptions. "No, sir. No prescriptions on file for that individual." My hands were shaking when I hung up the phone. Harold found me in the back of the kitchen that night, sitting on a crate with my head in my hands. He pulled up a chair and sat down across from me. "You look like a man whose world is falling apart," he said. I told him everything. The phone call, the missing records, the inconsistencies I had been ignoring for years. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back and let out a long breath. "I have seen this before," he said. "Men who bleed their families dry, who take and take until there is nothing left. You need to go home, Evan. You need to see for yourself." I had saved $800 over 9 years, the only money I had ever kept for myself. I used it to buy a bus ticket to Tennessee. The night before I left, I lay awake in my tiny room staring at a photograph of my father from when I was a child. In the picture, he was smiling, holding me on his shoulders. We looked happy. We looked like a family. I whispered to that photograph in the dark, "Please let me be wrong. Please let there be an explanation." There was an explanation, but it was not the one I had prayed for. The bus ride to Tennessee took 15 hours. I did not sleep. I could not sleep. My mind kept replaying every conversation I had ever had with my father, searching for signs I had missed, searching for lies I should have caught. I arrived in Madison Ridge early in the morning. The town looked exactly the same as I remembered, small, tired, forgotten by the rest of the world. I walked through the main street and felt like a ghost returning to a place that had moved on without me. I made my way toward my childhood home, the house where I had grown up, the house where my mother had died, the house where my father had held me and promised that we would always have each other. But when I turned onto the familiar street, something was wrong. The house was empty. The windows were boarded up. The yard was overgrown with weeds. A faded for sale sign leaned against the mailbox, so weathered that the realtor's name was barely visible. I stood there staring at the place where I had spent my childhood. It looked like no one had lived there in years. An older woman was walking her dog across the street. She stopped when she saw me staring. "You looking for someone, honey? I am looking for Martin Ward. This is his house. This is where he lives." She shook her head slowly. "Nobody has lived in that house for a long time. Martin sold it years ago. Must have been 5, maybe 6 years back. 5 or 6 years. I had been sending money home for 9 years. My father had not lived in this house for most of that time." "Do you know where he went?" I asked. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow, distant. I heard he moved somewhere nicer. "Westwood Estates, I think. It is about 40 minutes west of here. Fancy place, lots of big houses." I thanked her and started walking. I did not have a car. I did not have money for a taxi. I walked to the edge of town and stuck out my thumb. A truck driver picked me up and drove me most of the way. He tried to make conversation, but I could not focus on anything he said. My mind was a storm of questions and fears and a growing sense of dread that I could not escape. Westwood Estates was everything Madison Ridge was not. The streets were wide and clean. The lawns were perfectly manicured. The houses were enormous with stone facades and iron gates and cars in the driveways. It cost more than I would earn in a decade. I found the address someone in town had given me. I walked down a tree-lined street until I stood in front of a house that made me stop breathing. It was a mansion. There was no other word for it. Stone columns framed the entrance. A circular driveway curved around a fountain that sprayed water into the air. The garage had 3 doors. The windows were tall and gleaming. The mailbox had a name on it in gold letters. Ward. My legs felt like they were made of concrete. I forced myself to move closer. I walked along the edge of the property until I found a gap in the fence that led to the backyard. And there he was, my father. He was standing in the middle of a lawn that looked like a golf course. He was throwing a football to a little boy who could not have been older than 4. The boy was laughing, running in clumsy circles, trying to catch the ball with tiny hands. My father was laughing too. He looked nothing like the man I had imagined for 9 years. He was not thin and frail. He was not pale and weak. He was tanned, healthy, strong. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who had never known a day of hardship in his life. A woman sat on the patio behind them, watching with a glass of wine in her hand. She was elegant and polished with styled hair and expensive clothes. She looked at my father with the kind of adoration that made my stomach turn. I watched them for 20 minutes. I could not move. I could not think. I just stood there, hidden by the fence, watching my father live a life I had paid for with my blood and my youth and my broken hands. Every dollar I had sent him was right there in front of me. The mansion, the fountain, the manicured lawn, the designer clothes on the woman's back, the toys scattered across the grass for the little boy to play with. My money, my sacrifice, my life. He had taken everything from me and built himself a paradise. I do not know how long I stood there before I finally made myself move. I walked around to the front of the house. I climbed the steps to the front door. I pressed the doorbell and listened to the chime echo through the house. The woman answered. Up close, she was even more polished than I had expected. She looked at me with a polite but confused expression, the way you might look at a delivery man who had shown up at the wrong address. "Can I help you?" she asked. Before I could answer, my father appeared behind her. Our eyes met. I watched the color drain from his face. I watched recognition flash in his eyes, followed immediately by something cold and calculating. He composed himself in less than a second. "I am sorry," he said. "Do we know you?" My heart was pounding. My hands were shaking, but my voice came out steady. "Dad, it is me. It is Evan." The woman turned to look at him. Her confusion deepened. "Martin, who is this? You told me you do not have any children." My father looked at me with eyes that held no love, no guilt, no shame, just cold, hard stone. "There must be some mistake," he said. "I have never seen this man before in my life." That was the moment I stopped being his son. That was the moment I became his reckoning. For a moment, nobody moved. The woman stood in the doorway, looking between me and my father with growing confusion. My father stood behind her with his jaw clenched and his eyes locked on mine. The little boy had wandered up behind them and was tugging at the woman's dress, asking who was at the door. I could have screamed. I could have lunged at him. I could have broken down and begged him to explain why he had done this to me. but I did none of those things. Instead, I reached into my jacket and pulled out a folder. I had prepared for this moment. Some part of me had known, even before I left Cleveland, that I would need proof that my father would deny everything, that he would try to make me look crazy in front of his new family. So I had brought receipts, 9 years of wire transfer confirmations, every single one. Dates, amounts, and the name of the recipient, Martin Ward. I had printed phone records showing hundreds of calls to his number. I had saved voicemails on my phone that I had never been able to delete because hearing his voice made me feel less alone. And I had one more thing, a photograph. It was old and worn, creased from being folded and unfolded too many times. It showed a man holding a little boy on his shoulders. The man was smiling. The boy was laughing. On the back in my father's handwriting were the words, "Me and Evan Summer, 1998. I handed the folder to the woman. "My name is Evan Ward," I said. "I am his son, his only son until recently. For 9 years I have been sending him money because he told me he was dying. He told me he needed surgery for his heart. He told me he could not survive without my help." The woman opened the folder. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. Her face shifted from confusion to disbelief to something that looked like horror. "I worked as a dishwasher in Cleveland," I continued. "I lived in a room the size of a closet. I ate leftover food from the restaurant where I worked. I did not take a single vacation in 9 years. I did not buy new clothes. I did not go to the movies. I did not live. I survived. And every dollar I earned that I did not need to survive, I sent to him." I pointed at my father. "Over $80,000. That is what I sent him. That is what paid for this house. That fountain in your driveway, the clothes on your back, the toys in your yard. All of it came from my hands, from my back, from my life." The woman looked up at my father. Her face was pale. "Martin, is this true?" My father's mask slipped for just a second. I saw panic flash in his eyes before he recovered. "He is lying," my father said. "He is mentally ill. I do not know who this man is or what he is talking about. He probably saw our house and decided to run some kind of scam." I pulled out my phone, then explained this. I played a voicemail. The sound of my father's voice filled the doorway weak, pleading, the voice of a dying man, begging his son for help. "Son, I hate to ask you again, but the hospital is demanding another payment. They say they will not continue my treatment if I cannot pay. I do not know what I am going to do. You are all I have. Please, Evan, I need you." The voicemail was from 6 months ago. I had saved it because it made me feel needed, because it reminded me why I was sacrificing everything. Now it was evidence. The woman dropped the folder papers scattered across the doorstep. She turned to my father with tears forming in her eyes. "You told me you were a widower," she said. "You told me you had no family. You told me everything you have you built yourself. You told me you were self-made." My father reached for her arm. "Amanda, please let me explain." She pulled away from him like his touch burned her skin. "Explain what?" "That our home was built on your son's suffering. That you lied to me about who you are. That our son has a brother you pretended did not exist." The little boy started crying. He did not understand what was happening, but he could feel the tension. He could hear his mother's voice breaking. My father looked at me with pure hatred. For the first time, I saw who he really was. Not the loving father who raised me. Not the sick man who needed my help, just a selfish, hollow man who saw other people as tools to be used and discarded. "You had no right to come here," he said. "You had no right to ruin this." I almost laughed. I had no right. I gave you 9 years of my life. I gave you my youth. I gave you my health. I gave you everything I had. And you threw me away like garbage. You let me believe you were dying while you were building a mansion and starting a new family. You erased me. I turned to leave. I had done what I came to do. I had shown his wife who he really was. I had planted a seed that would tear his perfect life apart. But before I walked away, I stopped. I did not turn around. I spoke loud enough for all of them to hear. You told me once that wards do not abandon each other, that family is everything. I believed you. I destroyed myself because I believed you. But I understand now. You were never my family. I was just your wallet, and wallets do not get invited to the mansion they paid for. I walked down the driveway. Behind me, I could hear Amanda's voice rising. I could hear my father trying to explain, trying to lie, trying to save himself. I could hear the little boy crying for someone to tell him everything was okay. I kept walking. I did not look back. I took a bus back to Cleveland that same night. I did not stay in Tennessee. There was nothing left for me there. No home, no family, nothing but memories of a life built on lies. The ride back felt different than the ride there. On the way to Tennessee, I had been filled with dread and desperate hope. On the way back, I felt empty, hollow, like someone had reached inside my chest and scooped out everything that made me who I was. But somewhere in that emptiness, something else began to grow, something quieter, something that felt almost like relief. I did not have to save him anymore. I did not have to sacrifice anymore. For the first time in 9 years, I could keep what I earned. I could live for myself. When I got back to Cleveland, Harold was waiting for me at the diner. He did not ask what happened. He just looked at my face and nodded like he already knew. "You hungry?" he asked. "Starving." He made me a plate of eggs and bacon and toast, and he sat across from me while I ate. When I finished, he slid a piece of paper across the table. "I have been waiting to give you this," he said. "Promotion sous chef. Better pay, better hours. You have earned it 10 times over." I looked at the paper. Then I looked at him. "Why did you wait?" "Because you would have turned it down. You would have said you needed the extra dishwashing hours to send more money home. But now, there is no home to send it to. So take the job, Evan. Take something for yourself for once." I took the job. 3 months later, I received a letter from a lawyer in Tennessee. Amanda had filed for divorce. She had hired an investigator after I left, and what they found was worse than even I had imagined. My father had not just been lying to me, he had been lying to her. He had hidden bank accounts, he had forged documents, he had been funneling money from her family's investments into accounts she knew nothing about. The mansion was seized. My father was facing fraud charges. His perfect life, the one he had built on my suffering and her trust, was collapsing around him. I did not feel joy when I read that letter. I did not feel satisfaction or vindication. I just felt tired of carrying the weight of a man who never deserved my loyalty. I threw the letter away and went to work. Months passed. I moved out of my tiny room and into a small apartment with a window that overlooked the harbor. It was not fancy, but it was mine. I bought a bed that did not hurt my back. I bought groceries without calculating whether I could afford to eat that week. I started living like a normal person for the first time in nearly a decade. Harold introduced me to his daughter, a nurse named Melissa. She came into the diner one evening to visit her father, and Harold practically shoved me in front of her. "This is Evan," he said. "He is the hardest working man I have ever met. Also the most stubborn. You two should get coffee." We got coffee. Then we got dinner. Then I found myself laughing for the first time in years. Real laughter. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and makes you forget all the pain that came before. One night, Melissa asked me about my father. I told her everything. The lies, the money, the mansion, the betrayal. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. "You know what I see when I look at you," she said. I see a man who loved so hard that someone took advantage of it. That is not weakness, Evan. That is rare. That is beautiful. The only person who should be ashamed is him. I never spoke to my father again. He sent me a letter once handwritten full of excuses and self-pity and hollow apologies that meant nothing. He blamed his choices on loneliness, on fear, on circumstances beyond his control. He never once took real responsibility for what he did. I read it once, then I burned it. Some people do not deserve forgiveness. Some people do not deserve a second chance. My father taught me that. He also taught me something else, something far more valuable. He taught me what family is not. Family is not someone who takes everything you have and gives nothing back. Family is not someone who erases you when you become inconvenient. Family is not blood. Family is not obligation. Family is not sacrifice without return. Family is Harold, who gave me a job when I had nothing and believed in me when I did not believe in myself. Family is Melissa, who saw my scars and called them beautiful. Family is the people who stand beside you in the hard times and never ask you to carry them alone. I am not a dishwasher anymore. I am a sous chef. I have a woman who loves me. I have a mentor who treats me like a son. I have a life that I built with my own hands for myself without anyone taking it from me. My father built a mansion on my pain. But here is the truth about houses built on lies. They always fall. And when his fell, I was not there to catch him. I was too busy learning how to catch myself. Drop a comment below and tell me your thoughts. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? Have you ever given everything to someone who gave nothing back? I want to hear your story. And if you have not already subscribed to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another video. We post stories like this every week. Stories about betrayal and redemption. Stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. Stories that remind you that no matter what you have been through, you are not alone. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And remember, your loyalty is precious. Give it only to those who deserve it. I will see you in the next